When your son tells you someone else deserves your bedroom more than you do, it breaks something inside you. My name is Betty Sosa, and I'm 68 years old. 3 years ago, I lost my husband, Carlos, after a long battle with cancer. We were married 44 years, and through every up and down, we dreamed of one thing: a quiet little cottage surrounded by trees where we could wake up to birds instead of traffic. When he passed, I decided to finish that dream on my own. Every inch of my new cottage, just outside Asheville, North Carolina, carries a piece of him. He drew the plans for the wraparound porch, I picked the kitchen tile he loved, and the wood stove in the living room still smells like the pine we used to burn when we went camping. I thought that when I moved in, I'd finally have peace, a place where his memory could live right beside me. The week I finished moving in, my son Ernest called to say he and his wife Trina wanted to visit. I was thrilled. I imagined them sitting on the porch with me, coffee mugs in hand, looking out at the woods. I thought maybe this would be one of those rare weekends that made me feel like family again. When they pulled up, Trina stepped out first in one of those tailored coats that probably cost more than my entire furniture set. Ernest followed behind her, smiling that half-nervous smile he gets when he's caught between pleasing two people. "Oh, Betty," Trina said as she walked in, spinning slowly in the living room. "This is gorgeous. It feels like one of those vacation rentals." I smiled and said, "It's home." She walked from room to room, touching things as if she was already redecorating in her head. "The light in here is perfect," she said, looking around the master bedroom. "It would be ideal for my mom. You know, Patricia's been really struggling since her surgery." I thought she was just making conversation, but then she said it so casual it almost sounded kind. "We were wondering if she could stay here for a while, just until she gets back on her feet." I blinked. "Here? As in with me?" Trina nodded as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yes. She needs fresh air and quiet. And honestly, your cottage is just what the doctor ordered." I tried to stay polite. "Well, I do have a guest room." She cut me off. "Oh, I was thinking she could take your room. It's on the first floor, and it's closer to the bathroom. It'll be easier for her knees." I thought she was joking. I waited for Ernest to laugh or say something like, "Come on, honey, that's too much." But he didn't. He just looked down at his shoes and said softly, "Mom, it's just temporary. You could use the guest room for now." For a second, I couldn't find words. My own son, my only child, was standing in the house I built with his father's dream and telling me to give up my bedroom, the same room where I still kept Carlos's photograph on the nightstand. I tried to steady my voice. "Ernest, your father and I designed that room together. I'd rather not." Trina gave a small laugh. "Oh, Betty, don't be so sentimental. It's just a room. Patricia will be so grateful, and it'll only be for a little while. You'll be upstairs, you won't even notice." Upstairs. In the small loft I'd turned into a sewing space, barely big enough for a bed. She wanted me, the homeowner, to move upstairs, while her mother took over the master bedroom. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I forced a smile. "I'll think about it," I said. Trina beamed. "Perfect. I'll tell her. You'll love having company around, Betty. The house will feel so alive." Ernest kissed me on the cheek, still avoiding eye contact. They spent the afternoon pretending everything was fine, talking about work, their plans, the price of gas, while I kept hearing her voice in my head. "It's just a room." That night, after they left, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The woods were quiet except for the crickets, and I stared through the trees until I could barely see. Carlos used to call this hour our peace time. But I didn't feel peace that night. I felt invisible. I tried to understand why my son agreed with her. Maybe he thought it was practical. Maybe Trina had a way of making everything sound reasonable. But the truth hurt. He didn't defend me. I looked through the window at the soft glow of the lamp in the bedroom, the one Carlos and I picked out together at a flea market 20 years ago. I could still picture him laughing as we argued over who got the first shower in the mornings. That room was the last place that still felt like us. And now someone else, Trina's mother, was supposed to sleep there. I whispered out loud, "Not in this lifetime." I wasn't angry yet. It was something deeper, something colder. A kind of heartbreak that doesn't make you cry. It just makes you see things clearly. I realized this wasn't about helping someone's mother. This was about control. Trina wanted to make the rules in a house she didn't build, and Ernest was too weak to stop her. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the blueprints Carlos drew years ago. His handwriting was still there in the margins. Front porch, big enough for 2 chairs and her coffee cup. It hit me then. I hadn't built this cottage just to have a place to live. I built it to keep our promise alive. Giving up that bedroom wasn't an option, not for comfort, not for convenience, and certainly not for someone else's mother. They thought I'd just nod like always. But they had no idea what this house meant to me or what I'd do to protect it. The next morning, I tried to push the whole thing out of my head. Maybe I had overreacted. I thought, maybe it really was just about helping someone recover. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A few days later, I got my answer. Ernest and Trina came back that weekend, saying they wanted to measure a few things for Patricia's stay. They walked around with a tape measure while I made coffee. I heard them laughing outside on the porch, so I didn't think much of it until I caught a few words that made my stomach twist. Trina's voice was low, but clear enough. Once the title's in your name, you can start the loan paperwork. Then Patricia's voice answered, smooth and sure. Good. We'll use her age as the reason. Say it's for her safety, so she won't have to deal with all that stress anymore. I froze. My hand stopped on the coffee pot. My own daughter-in-law and her mother were planning to take over the home Carlos and I built. I stayed quiet, afraid that if I moved, they'd hear me. Trina said she'll agree if Ernest talks to her gently. She trusts him. Patricia laughed. Old people always do. They want peace, not trouble. By the time she realizes, it'll already be signed. I could barely breathe. My son's name in that conversation. Ernest talks to her gently. I pressed my hand to my chest and felt my heart beating like a hammer. They came back inside a few minutes later, all smiles, pretending everything was fine. Trina asked if I wanted to join them for lunch in town, but I said I was tired. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I sat at the kitchen table trying to understand what I just heard. It wasn't just about disrespect anymore. They wanted control. The plan was clear. Move Patricia in, make it look like I couldn't live alone, then transfer the title for my safety. I thought about Carlos, how he worked double shifts at the paper mill so we could afford the land, how we'd sat in that same kitchen drawing our dreams on scratch paper. I looked at his handwriting still framed above the doorway. Build something that lasts. I wasn't about to let them tear that down. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing Trina's voice. Once the title's in your name. By morning, my mind was set. I wasn't going to confront them yet. I was going to be smart. I got dressed, grabbed my purse, and drove into Asheville. My first stop was the Buncombe County Records office. I'd never been there before, but the woman at the counter recognized my address right away. New construction, right? Congratulations, she said. I smiled politely and asked for a certified copy of my property deed. She printed it for me, stamped and sealed, with my name, Betty Sosa, in bold letters across the top. I asked her quietly, can anyone change this without my consent? She shook her head. Only if you sign the paperwork yourself. but you'd be surprised how many people sign things they don't fully read. That sentence stayed with me. I got 2 more certified copies and put them in separate envelopes, one for my lockbox at the bank and one for my lawyer, Mr. Feldman, who handled Carlos's will. On the drive home, the fall colors along the highway looked different to me. The red and gold leaves that usually felt peaceful now looked like warning lights. I realized this wasn't just about protecting a house. This was about protecting everything Carlos and I built together. When I got home, I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen, the sunroom, the master bedroom. I touched the walls, the furniture, the framed pictures. It wasn't greed that made me hold on to it. It was love. Every board, every tile was a memory. That night, I made myself a sandwich, turned on the news, and pretended to be relaxed when Ernest called. "Mom," he said, "did Trina mention that her mom's doctor recommended a quieter place for recovery?" "Yes, she did," I said. "Good. We just think it's best for everyone. You won't have to worry about being alone all the time either." There was a pause. I could tell he was reading from her script. "I'm fine alone, Ernest," I said gently. "Always have been." He sighed. "Mom, you know we're just trying to help." I know what help looks like, son. And I also know what it doesn't. He didn't have a response for that. He just said he'd call me later. After we hung up, I sat there in silence. It hurt, more than I could explain, to realize he was part of it, even if he didn't fully understand what he was doing. But I wasn't going to let pain make me foolish. I needed to think like them, not feel like me. Over the next week, I watched closely. Trina started dropping by without notice, saying she needed to check the layout for Patricia's medical needs. She took photos of the living room, the front steps, even the master bath. I smiled and offered her coffee, pretending not to notice. At night, I wrote down everything, every visit, every comment, every date and time. Ruth, my neighbor, came by one afternoon and found me with a notebook full of notes. "What are you doing, Betty?" she asked, curious. "Protecting my home," I said. She nodded slowly, then smiled. "Good girl. Don't let them rush you." Sometimes people mistake quiet for weakness. That line stuck in my mind. Quiet didn't mean weak. It meant ready. By the end of the week, I'd copied every important document. The deed, the insurance, the tax forms. I stored them in 3 different places. If they tried anything, I'd be prepared. Still, when I looked at Ernest's name on my phone, I felt that old ache. He was my son, the boy who once ran through these woods chasing fireflies. Somewhere between growing up and getting married, he'd stopped seeing me as the woman who raised him and started seeing me as someone to manage. That realization hardened something inside me. I wasn't just protecting a house. I was protecting my dignity, my peace, and the promise I made to Carlos to keep what we built standing. So I kept smiling at Trina. I offered her pie, nodded when she talked about making space for Patricia, and never let on that I knew, because I wasn't ready to fight them yet. Not until I had proof. If they thought age made me blind, they were about to learn just how sharp an old woman's eyes can be. It was a Thursday morning when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I looked out the window and froze. A white SUV I didn't recognize was parked out front, trunk open, and standing beside it was Patricia Decker, Trina's mother. She wasn't holding a small overnight bag. She had boxes, a lamp, and what looked like her favorite recliner wrapped in plastic. I stepped outside, forcing a polite smile. "Patricia, what brings you here?" She waved as if we'd been expecting her. "Well, dear, Trina said it was fine if I came a few days early. I didn't want to be a bother, but the movers were already scheduled." I blinked. "Movers?" "Yes," she said, walking right past me toward the porch. "Just a few things from my apartment. I thought it would be easier to settle in before the weather changes." She said it like she was talking about a weekend trip, not moving into my home. I followed her inside as two men carried in boxes marked Patricia's dishes and fragile. She pointed toward my kitchen. "Just set them there, boys." I watched, stunned, as my quiet cottage started filling with her things. China, framed photos, a sewing basket, even a full-length mirror. "Patricia," I said carefully, "I wish I'd known you were coming today." She gave a sweet smile. "Oh, Trina probably forgot to mention it. She's been so busy with work." Then she walked into my kitchen, looked around, and sighed. "I'll need to rearrange a few things. The plates are too high up for me, and you've got all the pots mixed in with the pans. It'll be more efficient my way." I said nothing. I just stood there, watching her open my cabinets like she owned them. By the time the movers left, she'd already unpacked her recliner and placed it right in front of my fireplace, pushing my own armchair to the side. She patted it proudly. Perfect view of the woods. I can already feel my blood pressure dropping. That evening, she asked what we were having for dinner. Not if she could help what we were having. I told her I usually just made something simple, maybe soup and salad. "Oh dear," she said, shaking her head. "At your age, you need more protein. I'll cook from now on. You just relax." Her relax meant sitting quietly while she took over my kitchen. She criticized my knives, my spices, even my salt. "Do you know how much sodium is in this brand?" she asked, holding up the container. "No wonder your ankles look a bit puffy." I smiled and nodded, hiding the little notebook in my apron pocket, where I'd started jotting things down. Date, time, and words, every single one of them. By the second day, she had completely rearranged the kitchen. My mugs were in a new cabinet, my favorite frying pan was missing, and she'd replaced my curtains with lace ones from her boxes. I asked where my things were. "In storage," she said cheerfully. "You'll thank me later." That afternoon, I walked to my friend Ruth's house next door. She'd been my neighbor since before Carlos passed. When I told her what was happening, she listened without interrupting, just shaking her head every so often. Finally, she said, "Betty, don't let them see you sweat. Every condescending dear she calls you is another piece of evidence. Write it down." "I already started," I said, tapping my notebook. Ruth smiled. "Good. Let her think she's winning. People like that always show their hand when they think you've given up." Her words stuck with me. When I went back home, Patricia was in the living room talking loudly on speakerphone. It was Trina. "Yes, honey, the place is perfect. Once we make the downstairs more accessible, she'll realize how much better it is for me and for her." I stood quietly in the doorway. Patricia saw me and didn't even lower her voice. "Oh, Betty, we were just talking about how wonderful this arrangement will be. Trina says Ernest is looking into a small home office up here, too. A home office for my son in my house." I forced a smile. "Sounds lovely," I said. That night, I couldn't find anything in my own kitchen. Patricia had even moved the sugar, saying it didn't belong near the flour. I sat down with my tea, and she joined me with that same soft, syrupy tone she used every time she wanted to sound helpful. "Betty, have you thought about what happens if you get sick?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "Sick? Well, you live alone in the woods. It's peaceful, sure, but not exactly safe. What if you fall or something happens? Have you looked at assisted living options nearby? There's a lovely place in Hendersonville." I stared at her. She said it so smoothly, like she was talking about the weather. "I'm doing fine right here," I said. She smiled again. "For now, dear. But these things change quickly at our age. You don't want to be a burden later." That word, burden, stung like a slap. After she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. Her recliner sat where Carlos's chair used to be, the one he built with his own hands. I could almost hear him saying, "Don't let anyone walk over you, Bet." I opened my notebook and wrote down her last comment word for word. Then I scrolled through my phone, checking the small camera I'd installed near the porch earlier that week. It was working perfectly. The next morning, she announced she'd invited her bridge club friends over once things settle. I nodded, pretending to agree, while my stomach turned. Later, Ruth stopped by with homemade banana bread. She looked around and whispered, "It's like she's nesting." I smiled tightly. That's one word for it. Ruth squeezed my hand. "Keep calm. You're smarter than they are. You've lived too long to let them trick you." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't scared anymore. I was done being polite. Patricia thought she could take over my home, but I had something she didn't: time, patience, and proof. I turned off the lamp and whispered to the darkness, "You picked the wrong old lady." That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of what she said, but because I finally knew what I was going to do. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Patricia was already in the kitchen, making oatmeal and humming like she owned the place. I thanked her, took my bowl, and sat at the table pretending everything was fine. But my mind was turning. I wasn't going to argue or lose my temper. I was going to find proof. Later that afternoon, while Patricia went into town with Ruth, who, bless her heart, offered to give her a little space, I finally had the house to myself. I took the chance to tidy up and get some quiet time in the study. When I turned on my laptop, I noticed something odd. Ernest's email account was still open on the screen. He must have used it last weekend when he helped me set up a grocery delivery account. I almost closed it out of habit, but then a subject line caught my eye: loan application, Sosa property ID. My stomach dropped. I clicked it. There were attached forms, appraisal requests, even a copy of my property tax statement, all with my home address and parcel number. Under owner, it listed Betty Sosa, but in the section for authorized signer, someone had typed Ernest Sosa, power of attorney. I stared at it for a long moment. I had never signed a power of attorney for my son. Then I saw another email from Trina to someone at a real estate management company. The subject line read, "Rental projections for Asheville Cottage." Inside the message, she wrote, "Once my husband's mother transitions to assisted living, the property will be available for short-term rentals. Please provide income estimates for 6 and 12 months. It felt like the air left the room. They weren't just trying to move Patricia in. They were planning to move me out. I printed every message and saved copies to a flash drive. My hands were shaking, but I kept going, scrolling through their conversations, finding more evidence. I wasn't surprised anymore, just disappointed. I thought of Carlos again. He used to say, "Bet, people show you who they are when money's involved." He was right. That evening, when Patricia came home, she talked nonstop about how friendly the people at the grocery store were, and how everyone said I looked too young to be retired. I nodded, smiled, and said nothing. Inside, I felt calm, too calm. It was the kind of calm you get when fear finally turns into purpose. The next morning, I called Mr. Feldman, the lawyer who handled Carlos's will. I told him I needed to see him in person, and he gave me an appointment for the same day. When I got there, he stood up to greet me. "Betty, what's going on? You sound serious." I handed him the folder with the printed emails and loan forms. He read quietly for several minutes, his expression changing from curiosity to disbelief. "Did you sign anything recently?" he asked. "Not a thing," I said. He leaned back and exhaled. "You're lucky you caught this." They were preparing to file for a home equity loan using falsified authorization. If that had gone through, it could have been a mess to reverse. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Can we protect the property?" He thought for a moment. "Yes, we'll put it in a living trust with you as the sole trustee. That means no one, not even family, can touch it without your consent. Do it, I said. He smiled slightly. I'll draw it up. And Betty, keep your head down. Don't let them know you know anything yet. Before I left, he added, it might be wise to install a few small cameras in your home. Nothing fancy, just enough to record what's happening in case things escalate. That idea gave me a small sense of relief. Not fear, just preparation. When I got home, Patricia was in the kitchen again, wiping the counters with my towels. Oh, you were gone quite a while, she said. Run some errands. Yes, I said easily. Just taking care of a few things in town. She smiled, clearly pleased with herself. Good. I was thinking once Ernest and Trina finalized things, maybe we could all go shopping for new curtains. This house could really use a softer touch. I nodded. Maybe so. That evening, I ordered 2 small indoor cameras online and set them up quietly when she went to bed. One faced the living room, the other the hallway near my office. They blended in perfectly. Over the next few days, I carried on as usual. I cooked breakfast, took my walks, chatted politely with Patricia. But each time she corrected me, each time she touched my things, I wrote it down in my notebook. Every word, every date, every comment. She had no idea I was documenting everything. One afternoon, Ruth stopped by again with a plate of cornbread. She noticed how calm I looked and said, "You've got that quiet fire in your eyes, Betty. What are you up to?" I just smiled. Let's just say I'm working on something. Ruth chuckled. Good. Just don't let them see it coming. A few days later, Ernest called. His voice was full of fake cheer. Mom, Trina said Patricia's settling in well. Isn't it nice having company? It's been interesting, I said. How's work? He hesitated, then said, busy. But listen, we might need to handle a few small papers soon, just to make sure the property's insured correctly. I'll stop by with them later. All right, I said calmly. Bring them over whenever. When he hung up, I wrote the date in my notebook. I wasn't scared anymore. I knew the kind of papers he meant, and I'd be ready. By the end of that week, the trust papers were signed and filed. My lawyer had the originals, I had the copies, and my name was locked tight where it belonged. That night, I stood outside on the porch looking up at the stars. The woods were still, the air crisp. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. Not because the problem was gone, but because I'd stopped being afraid of it. Patricia and Trina thought they were planning quietly, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. They wanted to turn my home into their business. I decided to turn their business into my lesson. I picked a Saturday when the leaves were turning and people were in good moods. I called Ernest first. Come for dinner, I said. Bring Trina and ask Patricia to join us. Ruth and a couple of neighbors will be here too. He sounded relieved, like maybe the rough patch was over. That's great, Mom. We'll be there at 5. I spent the morning cooking the dishes they always ask for. 4. Ernest, roast chicken with garlic and lemon. 4. Trina, the little goat cheese salad she pretends not to like but always finishes. For Patricia, I made mashed potatoes smooth enough for her tender teeth, and a peach cobbler that would make anyone kind. I set the table the way Carlos liked. Simple plates, clean glasses, folded napkins. I wanted the night to start warm. It would help the truth land. By 4, Ruth arrived with her cornbread. You ready? She whispered. I'm ready, I said. Stay calm, she reminded me. Let them talk. You control the room. Cars started pulling in. Ernest hugged me and said, I smelled like Sunday. Trina brought flowers she'd picked up from the grocery store, and Patricia walked straight to her recliner like it was reserved. I welcomed each of them with the same smile. No one needed to know anything yet. Dinner was easy. Ruth chatted about a craft fair in town, The neighbors talked about the dog that keeps digging under the fence, and Patricia told a long story about her physical therapy exercises. I asked questions, refilled water, and kept the food coming. When people eat well, they listen better. After we finished cobbler, I cleared a few plates and said, "Before coffee, I'd love to show you a little slideshow of the house from when it was just dirt to now." Carlos would have liked that. Everyone agreed. Most people like pictures, and none of them suspected the ones I had ready. I plugged my laptop into the television and opened a folder called House Progress. The first two photos were harmless. Me holding a shovel, the foundation being poured, Carlos's old sketch taped to the wall during construction. People smiled and made small comments. Perfect. Then I clicked to the next slide. It wasn't a picture of lumber or tile. It was a screenshot, loan application, Sosa property ID. Big and clear. My name at the top. Ernest listed as authorized signer, power of attorney. The room went quiet. Ernest leaned forward. Trina tilted her head. Patricia held her breath. I kept my voice steady. This is an application I found on my computer. It uses my home as collateral. I never signed a power of attorney for anyone. Not for Ernest, not for anyone else. Trina let out a light laugh. Betty, that must be a mistake. Maybe a draft. I clicked again. Another screenshot. Email to real estate management. Please send rental projections for the Asheville cottage for 6 and 12 months. Once my husband's mother transitions to assisted living, it will be available. I read the line slowly, then let it sit. I don't live in assisted living. I said, I live here. Trina shifted in her chair. That's not what it sounds like. I clicked again. A string of messages between Trina and Patricia. I trimmed the names and dates for privacy and highlighted only what mattered. Patricia will say the downstairs is safer for me. Once she moves up to the loft, she'll settle in. Then Ernest can bring the paperwork. Old people don't like trouble. Trina, once the title is under family, we can handle the loan. She won't have to worry about bills anymore. Patricia, she'll thank us later. I looked at Patricia. This is your phone number. These are your words. Patricia's face went tight. Well, those are out of context. You don't know what we were talking about. I clicked again. Another message from Trina to a friend. We'll get more out of the cottage than her pension ever did. It's practically a gold mine during leaf season. Trina sat back, crossed her arms, and chose silence. I clicked again. A set of forms filled with my address and parcel number. A draft deed transfer with a blank line where my signature would go. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake. I just pointed and explained the way you read a recipe card. Here's what I think was going to happen. I said, Patricia moves in. I get pushed upstairs. Ernest brings papers and tells me they're for insurance or maintenance. I sign without reading under pressure. You file the transfer for my safety. Then the loan papers go through. Then you start renting out the cottage to strangers. Meanwhile, I become a guest somewhere else. Nobody spoke. I walked to the kitchen, poured coffee for those who still wanted it, and placed the cups quietly. Then I clicked again. This slide was a simple photo, my deed, stamped and certified from the Buncombe County Records Office. My name, my signature, my property ID. I visited the county. I said, I requested certified copies. I asked what could change this. The woman told me only my signed consent. Nothing else. Trina tried again. Betty, we would never force you to sign anything. Ever. I think you're misunderstanding what we were planning. Then let me keep going, I said, and clicked. An email from Ernest's account to a bank officer. We'll bring the POA paperwork when we finalize. I face my son. Did you ever talk to me about that? Ernest, about being your own mother's power of attorney. He couldn't meet my eyes. I thought it would be easier for the paperwork. He said quietly. Trina said. I know what Trina said. I answered. I want to know what you thought. Ruth spoke up from the far end of the table, soft and firm. Let her finish. I clicked again. One more message from Patricia. To Trina, she's too sentimental about that room. We'll move her things slowly. She'll adjust. Patricia tried to smile. Betty, come on. We were talking big to feel brave. I'm recovering. I needed care. That's all. You needed care? I agreed. But care isn't control. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall. I let the quiet work for me. Then I opened a new folder on the computer. House Trust. I held up a clean folder from my lawyer with tabs and signatures. A few days ago, I met with Mr. Feldman. He helped me place this property in a living trust. I am the only trustee. No one can take loans on it, rent it, or sell it without my written consent. Copies have been filed and notarized. I have extra copies off-site. I placed 2 sealed envelopes on the table. These are for Ernest and Trina. Inside are copies of the trust summary and a letter stating that any future contact about my home goes directly to my attorney. Trina's mouth twisted. You made all this drama for what? A slideshow? You could have spoken to us like adults. I am speaking to you like an adult. I said, I'm using adult language. Deed, loan, consent, trust. Ernest finally looked up. He was pale. Mom, we just wanted to help you with bills. We thought. I cut him off gently. You thought your mother was a soft target. You thought grief makes people easy to move. You forgot who raised you. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. Patricia shook her head and folded her arms. All of this over a house. You can't take it with you, Betty. I nodded. True. But while I'm here, I live in it. I cooked for you in it tonight. I pay the taxes. I built it with a man I loved for 44 years. That makes it mine. Trina stood up fast, her chair scraping the floor. We don't have to sit here and be accused. No, I said calmly, you don't. But you do need to hear one last thing. I turned off the TV and let the room return to normal. Faces, plates, cups. Nothing dramatic. Just real life in a living room. I stood tall and spoke past the tightness in my throat. This house isn't for sale. And starting tomorrow, none of you will have keys to it. No yelling. No show. Just a simple sentence that closed the door they'd tried to pry open. Patricia grabbed her purse. You're making a mistake, she said. When you're old and alone, you'll be sorry. I'm already old, I said, and I'm not alone. Ruth stood and put a hand on my shoulder. Our neighbors gathered their things quietly. People know when a line has been crossed. They don't need a speech to see it. Trina marched out to the porch. Ernest lingered, torn between 2 women and the life he'd helped set in motion. He walked to me and tried to hug me. I didn't move at first, then I let him. He smelled like the boy he used to be for half a second. Then he let go and left. I locked the door behind them, then set their envelopes on the small hall table where they couldn't miss them on their way out. Ruth and I washed dishes in silence. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew the answer. When the kitchen was clean, I took the spare keys off the hook, slid them into a drawer, and put a note on the door for the locksmith I'd already scheduled for the morning. I checked the cameras. Everything had recorded the parts that mattered. Their words, my words, the screenshots on the screen. I stood in the hallway and looked down at my list, dates, times, exact phrases. Every step had led to this night. Not because I wanted a fight, but because I wanted peace. I turned off the lights and headed to my bedroom. My room. The same room Carlos sketched out with his pencil on the back of a gas receipt one summer when we were young and foolish and sure of everything. Before I slept, I wrote one last line in my notebook. Dinner, slideshow, Trust explained, keys revoked. Then I closed it and put it on the nightstand. The house was quiet again. And this time, the quiet belonged to me. The house felt too quiet after they left. The sound of the door closing behind them was heavier than I expected. Patricia's perfume still hung in the air, a sharp, artificial sweetness that didn't belong in my home. I walked to the living room and looked around. Her recliner sat empty, her half-finished cup of tea still on the coffee table. I didn't touch it. I wanted to see the proof that she was really gone. Outside, I heard car doors slam. Patricia's voice carried through the open window. She's lost her mind. She shouted to Trina. Let's go before I say something I regret. Trina didn't argue. She grabbed her purse and followed. Ernest stood by the car, looking torn between leaving and staying. He caught my eye through the window, and for a second, he looked like the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Then he turned away and drove off with them. I stood at the window until the taillights disappeared down the road. That night, I didn't eat. I washed the dishes from dinner, dried them carefully, and placed them back in the cabinet. Every small motion calmed me. When everything was clean, I sat down in the master bedroom, the one Carlos and I designed together. The lamp beside me gave off a soft light. On the nightstand sat a picture of Carlos and Ernest, taken the summer Ernest turned 8. Carlos was holding a fishing pole, grinning, and Ernest was barefoot, showing off a fish half his size. Both of them looked proud. I picked up the photo, ran my thumb over their faces, and felt something inside me break. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. Just a deep, quiet ache. I whispered. I did what I had to Carlos. Tears came slow but steady. I cried for the boy my son used to be, and for the mother I'd been, always trying to smooth things over, to keep peace even when it cost me pieces of myself. When the tears stopped, I felt empty but steady. I changed into my robe and went to bed. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight pouring through the window. The air felt cleaner. Somehow, I made coffee, sat on the porch, and listened to the birds. It reminded me why I'd fought so hard to keep this place. By noon, I got a call from my lawyer, Mr. Feldman. Betty, he said, you were right to lock things down when you did. What happened? I asked. Someone tried to file a property claim using your address and parcel number. The system flagged it because the property is now under your living trust. It was blocked automatically. I took a deep breath. So it's protected. Completely, he said. They can't touch it. Whoever tried will get a notice of rejection this week. Thank you, I said softly. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, holding my coffee cup with both hands. I wasn't surprised by the attempt. I'd known it was coming, but hearing that the trust had done its job gave me a kind of peace I hadn't felt in months. 3 days later, Ruth came by with groceries. You look lighter, she said, setting the bags down. I finally slept. I told her. Well, it shows, she said. You've got color back in your cheeks. She poured herself some coffee and sat across from me. So what's the latest? I told her about the blocked claim, the lawyer's call, and how quiet it had been since. Ruth nodded. That means they're scrambling. People like that always are when their plans fall apart. She was right. Word traveled fast in small towns. Within a week, I heard that Patricia had moved out of her apartment in Charlotte after the landlord filed for unpaid rent. Her credit was a mess. Trina, who'd been so proud of her job at a design firm, had been let go. The firm was downsizing, but rumor had it she'd been missing deadlines and taking personal calls during work. Ernest, from what I heard, was staying with a friend while he sorted things out. He didn't call, and I didn't reach out. Not yet. One afternoon, I drove into town to drop off some paperwork at the bank. The clerk at the counter smiled and said, "You always look so calm, Ms. Sosa. What's your secret?" I smiled back. I learned the difference between peace and quiet. I said, "Quiet means things are hidden. Peace means they're settled." When I got home, the mailbox held an envelope with no return address. Inside was a short note in Ernest's handwriting. "Mom, I'm sorry for everything. I need time to think. I hope you're okay." I read it twice and folded it neatly. I didn't know if I'd ever get an apology in person, but it was a start. I put the note inside my notebook, right next to the last entry from the dinner night. That evening, Ruth stopped by again. She brought pie this time, and her usual straight talk. She handed me a slice and said, "You didn't lose a son, Betty. You just found your spine." I laughed through a sniffle. "I guess so. You did what most people wouldn't have had the guts to do," she said. "You stood up for yourself, and you didn't scream, didn't fight dirty. You just showed the truth. That's strength." I nodded, knowing she was right, but still feeling that ache under the pride. We ate pie and talked about little things, the weather, the garden, her sister's hip replacement. Life going on as usual felt like the biggest gift of all. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the last light fade through the trees. The house was quiet, but it was my kind of quiet, the kind that feels earned. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the dinner, the proof. It felt like closing a door that had been opened too long. I picked up my notebook one last time and added a short line beneath the others. They tried, and they failed. Home safe. Then I looked out at the woods and whispered to myself, "Carlos, we built it to last." And it did. I went to bed early that night, feeling lighter. But peace doesn't always stay still. Sometimes life has one more lesson waiting, because the biggest surprise wasn't what I did that night. It was what happened 3 months later. 3 months passed before I saw Ernest again. It was late February, the kind of cold that makes the woods sound quieter than usual. I was in the backyard cutting dead branches when I heard a car pull into the driveway. When I looked up, there he was, standing next to a dented sedan that wasn't his. He looked thinner, older somehow. His hair was uncombed, and he was wearing the same coat I'd bought him 5 Christmases ago. I didn't move. I just waited for him to speak first. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I nodded. "Hi, Ernest." He looked around the yard, hands in his pockets. "Everything looks the same." "It's supposed to," I said. "That's the point of home." He took a step closer. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, but finally nodded. "You can." Inside, he looked around like he was afraid to touch anything. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and the loaf of banana bread cooling on the counter. He sat at the kitchen table, the same spot he'd sat in as a boy doing homework, and kept his eyes low. "I didn't come to fight." He started. "I just wanted to talk." "All right," I said. He took a deep breath. "Trina and I are separated. She moved back to her mother's place in Hendersonville." I didn't respond. "She said I embarrassed her," he continued, "after the dinner, after the emails came out. She said I ruined everything." He rubbed his forehead, but she was the one who pushed it. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I really believed we were helping you." "Helping me?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "She said you were struggling with bills, that you were lonely, that if we handled the paperwork, you could just relax by taking my house." I asked. He looked up, guilt written all over him. "I see that now. I see how wrong it was. I trusted her more than I trusted myself." He leaned back, eyes wet. "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I see it now." I sat down across from him, folding my hands. "You know, Ernest, when you were little, you used to come in from the yard covered in dirt, holding rocks or sticks, telling me they were treasures. You always wanted to show me something. But somewhere along the way, you stopped showing me what was in your hands before it was too late. He swallowed hard. I know, and I wish I could take it back. You can't, I said, but you can start over. He nodded slowly. I'd like to if you'll let me. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, I've been staying with a friend, but I'm trying to get back on my feet. I can't find steady work yet. Trina maxed out my credit cards. We're in debt. I looked at him for a long moment. The mother in me wanted to fix it, but the woman in me, the one who'd finally learned boundaries, knew better. I can't give you money, Ernest, I said, but I can give you a chance. He nodded, already expecting that answer. What kind of chance? I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the yard. The leaves had fallen, leaving the trees bare. This place needs upkeep, I said. The garden, the fencing, the woods behind the house. They don't care that I'm 70. I could use help. He frowned. You mean work here? Yes, I said, but not as family doing a favor. As an employee, I'll pay you fairly, and you'll work for it. You'll report to me, and you'll respect the house while you're here. No assumptions, no shortcuts. He blinked, surprised. You'd hire me? I'd hire someone I can trust to take care of this place. Whether that's you depends on how serious you are. He nodded slowly, tears pooling again. I'll take it. I don't deserve it, but I'll take it. I gave him a small smile. Then show up Monday morning at 8. We'll go over what needs to be done. He laughed softly, like he couldn't believe it. Yes, ma'am. We sat together for another hour, talking about small things, my garden plans, the deer that kept sneaking into the yard, how Ruth was threatening to teach me bridge again. He told me he was living cheap and learning how to cook for himself. It was the first real conversation we'd had in years. Before he left, he looked around the kitchen. You've kept it nice, he said. It's easier to keep clean when people respect it, I said. He nodded, taking the words without defense. At the door, he hesitated. You really forgave me? I didn't say that. I replied. But I'm not holding on to the anger either. It's heavy, and I've carried enough in this life. He nodded again, like he understood, then walked out to his car. I watched him drive away, this time with a little more hope than sadness. The next week, he showed up on time. He fixed the back gate, cleaned out the gutters, and helped me move old branches from the path to the woods. He worked quietly, without complaint. When I paid him at the end of the week, he looked surprised. I didn't expect cash, he said. I don't do charity. I said, work deserves payment. He smiled a little. I'll remember that. I did too. Meanwhile, I heard from Ruth that Patricia was renting a small apartment in Hendersonville, living off her savings and a bit of Social Security. Trina had gone back to school part-time and was working at a retail store. I didn't wish them harm. I just didn't wish them here. The months rolled on. Spring came early that year, and the dogwoods bloomed like white lace around the house. Ernest kept working, never asking for more, never pushing boundaries. He started to look healthier, calmer. I'd see him sometimes standing by the edge of the woods, hands on his hips, just staring like he finally saw what his father and I built. One afternoon, he turned to me and said, Dad would have loved this place. Yes, I said quietly. He would have. After that, I knew we were healing in our own slow way. My days fell into rhythm again. I baked in the mornings, gardened in the afternoons, and walked under the same oak trees, Carlos, and I once dreamed about building beneath. Sometimes I'd stop halfway down the path and look back at the cottage, the sunlight on the roof, the smoke curling from the chimney, and I'd feel him there beside me, just like he used to be. Ruth visited often, bringing gossip and recipes. We'd sit on the porch, watching Ernest repair the fence or plant new flowers, and she'd whisper, See, piece looks good on you. She was right. I had finally stopped living in defense. The house wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a home again, quiet, safe, and mine. That night, as I locked up and turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd let others decide for her. She was older, yes, but also stronger, clearer, sure of her worth. I whispered to myself, they wanted to move someone into my house. Instead, I moved peace back into my life. If you've stayed with me this long, you probably understand what I mean when I say that age changes everything, but not always in the way people expect. People like to assume that getting older makes you softer, easier to manage. They think time makes you tired, that you'll go along with anything just to keep the peace. But what I learned through all of this is that age isn't weakness. It's armor. It's the strength that comes from having lived enough life to see through sweet words and shiny promises. When Trina and Patricia tried to take what Carlos and I built, they underestimated what experience teaches you. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, and I didn't beg. I just listened, watched, and waited. And when the time came, I let the truth do the talking. That's something younger people don't always understand. You don't have to scream to be powerful. Sometimes quiet, steady actions make more noise than shouting ever could. I also learned something else, something that took me a long time to see clearly. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you stop loving the people involved. It means you finally start respecting yourself. When I stood in front of that screen, showing them their own words and plans, it broke my heart. I never wanted to embarrass my son, but I couldn't let anyone, not even family, turn my love into an open door for disrespect. Forgiveness and boundaries can live in the same house, but only if both are built on truth. Forgiveness without honesty is just permission for someone to hurt you again. These days, life is calm. I wake up with the sun, make my coffee, and sit on the porch where the morning light hits the trees. The same house they tried to take from me is now the place I found my peace again. Ernest comes by twice a week to help with the yard. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. And that's all right. Healing doesn't always look like a hug. Sometimes it's just quiet understanding. I look around now and realize how many of us, especially women my age, spend years making sure everyone else is comfortable while we shrink ourselves to keep the peace. But the truth is we've earned our right to peace, too. We've built homes, raised families, and worked through losses. We don't owe anyone our silence. So if you're listening and you've ever been made to feel like you don't have a voice, remember, it's never too late to use it. Now I want to ask you, what would you have done if your own child sided with someone trying to take your home? Do you think forgiveness and boundaries can live under the same roof? And tell me honestly, would you have shown them the slideshow or let them find out another way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. If my story spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories like this one. Every story we tell here reminds us that strength doesn't fade with age. It grows wiser. Don't forget to download this wonderful book called 38 Uplifting and Funny Short Stories for Seniors. Easy-to-read tales that bring laughter, memories, and mental stimulation. It's full of heartwarming, simple stories written to bring a smile, stir up memories, and remind us that joy doesn't fade with age. It grows stronger. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Thank you for listening.